about 13 minutes for questions. Do we have anybody who wants to start? Yes, Sam, and then Fred.
Thank you all for your presentations. And it makes sense that Mariko is sort of moderating this panel because this is also near and dear to her own heart. So all of you in your own ways are sort of expressing this very violent pattern of ecological imperialism. And I guess I just want to hear from each of you, if you want to respond, what are you suggesting as the next critical steps in movement building beyond the local space you're working? What does it look like to build a connective tissue of our movements across the geographic spaces where we're organizing for transformation?
Yeah, it seemed to me that Pompeo's demands were rather dramatic, but actually non-starters when it comes to the Latin American elites who are very deeply already involved in trade with China. So I'm just curious what the response, if any, public response on their part was to Pompeo. Did they just tell them to get lost, or are they playing along with this, or what is the actual dynamic on the ground aside from the rhetoric of the waning imperial power?
Please go ahead.
So in terms of your question, like what do we do and how can we connect these different things? I mean, at least in my case with my work on militarism and how this is shaping places like Guam and the ways that people there are suffering, they have actually formed connections with anti-base activists around the region. So for example, like many of the anti-base activists in Guam have close connections with people who are doing the same kind of activism in places like Okinawa. But I actually think that, so there's a really great book that came out, and I forget the author's name now, but called How to Hide an Empire. And I think that many Americans don't actually know about places like Guam and what's happening there. And I think that we can really make a strong connection between how people there are suffering and how people here also are suffering. Because I think that we have poured something like $6 trillion into the war on terror since 9/11. At the same time that working class Americans are told, well, there's no money for education, there's no money for healthcare, things like this. So I really think that we need to, I don't know what it would look like or how it would happen, but I think that we do need a kind of counter international response also.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. It actually connects to another aspect of the work that I've been doing. I've been conducting a lot of interviews with activists in the seed sector and asking them what their experiences were, how they can effectively take influence on policy processes. And what I find is a recurring theme also from the literature is, well, maybe four aspects that are important. So I think it is important to build very broad coalitions horizontally, so connect, like when we look at breeding initiatives, for example, not just look at breeding or not just look at organic agriculture, but try to connect all steps of the process of producing seeds and bring them together, vertically connect between the local level, the regional level, the national level, the international level. Horizontally again, try to connect to other kinds of movements, other environmental movements, the climate justice movement, feminism, degrowth, try to bring all these different kinds of movements together and try to find the similarities rather than focusing on what separates us. So I think this is the first thing that is really important. This connects to a certain degree to the second one. The activists I've been talking with, they always emphasize when we're actually having an impact on the policy level, it's because we can show that on the ground we've developed those real utopias. We know how to do it differently. And that is what they can use to influence the government processes. There are some amazing examples in the Philippines, for example, where the government has actually adopted some of the practices as like broader policies. And then, which connects more strongly to what I've been presenting, which is also like a small part of my research on social ecological transformations, but connect to those narratives. Be aware of what you're pushing for. Don't fall back into those paradigms, because otherwise you just reinforce the current trajectories that we're facing. And then this refers a little bit more to the social movement literature. Try to use the diverse repertoires of contestations. So all kinds of different methods, be it of non-violent protest. On the ground, as I said, developing resistance by employing alternative practices. Then manifestations, demonstrations, strikes, uprooting GMO seeds. So try to really bring together all those different forms of protest. Thank you.
About Pompeo, I think it's a duality because Latin American elites historically they want a state to next to North American elites and European elites, and they want to stay there, and they want to show to the world they are next to European elites and North American elites. And actually, the last 5 years, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Macri and Argentina, they try show to the world that we are next to United States. Actually, the picture here is Piñera, is the Chilean president with Pompeo. So they want to show to the world we are with the United States. But the other slide is true too. Now China, progressively, China is the second trade of Latin American, and for some countries is the first, actually, of Chile. Chile can't live with sell the copper to China, Argentina, without sell soy to China. So that is the reality. I think, I mean, in Spanish we have a very ugly sentence, is with money dance the monkey. In this case, the reality is with money dance our elites. And in these moments, maybe the money is coming from China.
Okay, let's take a couple more questions. Mark and Kutu?
Okay, can I ask?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I
Um,
wanted to start with Julia, please.
Okay, so there's 4 questions that we need to fit in. Okay, we have about 4 minutes, so let's kind of make this a little bit quick, but we can go a little bit over. Why don't we start over here, and then we'll just move across the room.
Great, thank you for the talk. So this is a comment for Kyle and Fernando for the thing. It's just, this is great, interesting project, great project, yeah. The thing I just wanted to point out is don't forget the issue, especially in Latin American, Chinese or East Asia, don't forget the issue of slavery, because it's structurally isomorphic, and the technology is the same. So we think between 2 million and 5 million Chinese captives, technically not slaves, but the structure is the same. These men were kidnapped and brought against their will. But directly related to your work, Kyle, is the issue of blackbirding. Guam was almost completely depopulated in 1870. By who? By former slave owners in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, who moved to Hawaii and the Asia Pacific, and then started with their overseers and started traffic. It's called blackbirding, bringing men from Hawaii and Guam to white Australia. So in some sense, the slave owners at the end of the Civil War were leaving and going to the Asia Pacific, did the exact same thing there. So anyway, don't forget the primitive accumulation, the original violation of humans there. But thank you.
Thank you. I have Actually, Joan responded in a way, I don't know if I pronounced your name wrongly, but the one on global, the challenge of Latin America. In your response, you addressed a question that I have, like how do the states in Latin America engage with the elites globally? And my question then that follows from there is, you responded that well, that they are actually trying to profile themselves as friends that will be receiving them in good spirit. How about the resistance within those countries? How do the elites, the leaders, engage with the local resistance at the same time as they try to reconfigure how to engage with the global power houses? A question to Kyle. What is the scale of displacement as this now is happening? The plan is to build a third base, right? What has been the scale of displacement of the people living in those areas, and what would you think of the future? And Julia, sorry for many questions, you proposed a paradigm shift or kind of big, deep questioning of the paradigms. What you also said, of course, this is not the only solution, which I agree to. What would be, again, a way to, for example, you mentioned about the dominion or the control of humans over nature. Is this control of humans over nature or the relationship as exists altogether something bad to be thrown away? Or what kind of solution or parallel way of thinking about this engagement of humans controlling or managing nature do you propose as you problematize the existing status quo? Thank you.
Okay, why don't we just answer, because that was a lot, why don't we go ahead and answer that before we move on to the next question, but we will get to everybody's questions.
Yeah, so about the question of displacement on Guam. So there's a long, long history of Chamorro people being displaced to make room for American bases, including after World War II. The US Navy basically stole land from indigenous Chamorro people, and they even moved them into new towns that were built from scratch by the military. So like there's a town on Guam called Santa Rita, which was literally modeled after American towns in California, and they moved displaced Chamorros there. But right now, to make room for this third base, and certainly at the wildlife refuge, there are people living in the area who have been pushed out. I also saw when I was there a whole field of just piles of rubble, and what it was new housing, like brand new housing that was torn down to make room for the military base. So there is this long history, and there has been long, long legal fights led by indigenous Chamorro people who are trying to get their land back.
Well, at the moment, the scenario isn't so good because all the projects from the Latin American unity are being destroyed by the USA. Yeah? For example, particularly the left regime, like Lula in Brazil, or the socialist 21st perspective from Venezuela, from Ecuador, from Argentina too. Yeah? But the reality today is some different, because the right, the center, and the left need, yeah, the China economy, yeah, and at the moment they include the right political regime in Latin America are negotiating with China, not with the United States. That is the situation from the the political priorities at the top level. Yeah, obviously there are several struggles with the destroying to the local environment ecosystem, with the several problem with the population. Yeah, with the transnational exploitation of the product. But in this case, in the geopolitical perspective, the main objective from the important leaders in Latin America was to obtain the unity, yeah? Like UNASUR, for example. Yeah? But now, yeah, this project are working about no good times, if I understand.
I think that question, the answer is like a movie with two parts, because 15 years ago in Latin America we started the process, we call it with many names, but a typical name is progressive cycle, with a set of governments with a lot of characteristics, but two characteristics. That government tried the promise of a post-neoliberal process, and that government in many cases has support of popular movements. In Ecuador, Bolivia, so the popular movement made an articulation with that government. But 15 years ago, that process is over. That process is very fractionated, and now that cycle is history. Actually, we now have a cycle of very righter governments. So I'm very pessimistic, but now the resistance, if against government like Bolsonaro, like Macri, and the very conservative ideas in Latin America, very conservative. For example, we are coming from Chile, the alternative, similar, for example, similar to Bolsonaro or similar to Trump, that alternative in Chile, in the last election, has 8–9% of the president election. So now, it's very pessimistic, my speech, but we are thinking about that. What's happening in Latin America now after very hopefully cycle.
So thank you very much also for this question. I think that points to a very, very important aspect. When coming up with those paradigms, I consciously focused on the incumbent paradigms. So what is driving the current system, basically, and that is because I think that paradigms are something that's very difficult to grasp, and something that emerges over time. Yeah, it's an emergent process, and I think it's something that we shouldn't, as a scientific community, we shouldn't determine that. I think there's a wide varieties of alternatives to these incumbent paradigms already present in praxis. Very diverse approaches like deep ecology, eco-communities. What I've been doing is more reviewing the transformation literature on this. I haven't really worked specifically on this. But I think what is present in all these approaches is that we need a reconnection of humans to nature, and really recognizing that we are part of nature. I think that is the fundamental core of all those alternatives. And well, me personally, I can only speak as an individual, not as a scientist on this. I would say that we need a form of maybe eco-spiritual approach to really feel our interlinkages and to really be able to feel the pain when we're doing something that has negative impacts on the Earth ecosystem, yeah, to really be able to feel it. And I think this is the only way that can really stop us from doing all this harm that we've been doing.
Thank you.
Let's go on to the third question, then we have one more question after this one.
Yeah.
You know, when you were talking about in countries and GMO seeds, and I've actually studied this a lot, and what happens is, like, for instance, in India, they sold the GMO seeds to the farmers in India, and when the crops fail, they have paid so much money for those seeds that, you know, they don't have the money to pay for it, and they end up losing their crops. And a lot of native Indians have actually committed suicide for this. So this is kind of like an example of the Global North, the rich Global North actually taking advantage of the Global South. But you know the story of Vandana Shiva? Yeah. This is an individual who has done, who's an activist who actually, she had ended up making huge seed banks for these people that were basically that they always had. And I think this is the individual activism, activists do a lot for helping. And I think that's where I think it needs to come from, because it certainly isn't going to happen from the corporate world. They're not going to do anything for the people.
Let's just get the last question too, and then you guys can respond to both of them.
Oh, hi, this is a question from Fernando, and I was just, given all the facts and figures you gave in relation to the strategic materials, I was interested in knowing your view as to, given the urgency of having to carry on extracting, if not duplicating, the amount of strategic materials, particularly materials like lithium, for example, for the electrical cars. What is your proposal in terms of sustainable mining? Do you think, given what you've written about this, do you think it's possible to do sustainable mining? And if so, who would be the actors of this mining?
So if you guys just want to, I guess, respond, whoever feels like they can respond to those questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. I totally agree with that. I'm not sure exactly what your question was. So maybe I just start off, and if I didn't answer your question, then maybe you can let me know. So I think in the Philippines we've actually had, or there was actually quite a very similar development. So there was also like this green revolution that introduced a lot of GMOs. And that ended up destroying a lot of the traditional rice varieties that people have been using. So that has left a lot of farmers basically robbed of their existence. And I think the only way out of that was, or is still going on, is a very collective approach. So, well, I agree with you to a certain extent that individuals can be very inspiring. This is certainly the case for Vandana Shiva, but I think what we need is really collective approaches to pool, as a way of empowering the farmers and giving them the chance to help each other out. And this is certainly in the Philippines helped a lot of farmers to overcome those challenges that you've been mentioning. Is kind of an insurance system for them when their crops, when their harvests fail. They're helping each other out. They're giving seeds from also community seed banks, and even parts of the harvest when they, because in the Philippines, for example, there's a lot of natural disasters as well. So this is like a collective self-empowering So I would argue that we need collective approaches rather than corporate or individual ones, even though I do recognize the role of individual inspiration.
Oh, right.
Well, I don't know if I understand all, but it's possible later we can talk about this. But if I understand you about the sustainable mining, in my opinion, it's impossible to obtain sustainable mining. Yeah, in my opinion, the mining is the more activity non-sustainable along the history of human. Yeah, but that is only one aspect of the problem. Yeah, because it's necessary to the transition to the unsustainable economy to the sustainable economy. But how do you obtain this transition? That's the political problem. And in this war, I know that it's the unique war for us at the moment. But in this war, the power isn't equality in the humanity. There are different candidates to the power in some sense. So obviously the mining is not sustainable. But in this case, it's important how do you obtain the transition and the just transition for all the people, no unique for the permanent minorities. That is my opinion.
Okay, thank you all for this wonderful presentation. Thanks for the great questions. We've got a little bit over, but now it's time for lunch. And yes.
Yeah.